And yeah, if anyone has any questions about this proposal specifically, feel free to just post them in the chat group, and we can answer it after the call. But for now, I'll just give like a high level summary of the post and some key feedback that I think we got. I guess before I jump into that, Larry, do you want to give a quick introduction on yourself?
Thanks, Derek. Prior to starting Reverie with Derek, I was an investor at Digital Currency Group for multiple years and have invested in a bunch of projects in this space and really just kind of caught the governance bug and the DAO bug sometime in the last year and a half. I mean, if you just take a step back and you see all the cool stuff happening with DAOs and the ability to have anyone be able to come in and do really cool work for DAOs. I mean, that's so powerful. And that's some of the motivation for why I started Reverie with Derek. And we're super excited about Radicle and kind of treasuries as a concept, I think, generally underexplored. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding of what treasuries are in general by the market and market participants. And they're pretty simple, right? There's some amount of tokens that are held in a contract, and these tokens can really be used for anything. They can be used for growth, marketing initiatives, hiring, acquisitions, crazy things too. And it's really on the community to get in there and really do cool work using the treasury as financial firepower. And there's, a governance process around sort of unlocking the treasury, but it's there for safeguarding it, and it's a feature rather than a bug. And so we're really excited about treasuries and doing cool stuff with them. And so this sort of treasury work was just our really idea to work with the Radicle community to see what we can do here.
Thanks, Larry. So just I'll jump into the treasury. If anyone has any questions, just shoot them in the chat and we'll try to answer them. So since the RAD token, so as we all know, the RAD token was launched in about 6 months ago in February. And the intent was always to have this sort of a large portion of proceeds from the balancer sale, as well as from the original issuance, dedicated to a community-owned pool of capital. That now exists for Radicle, and it's quite large. There's almost 50% of all RAD tokens in existence are part of this pool, and proceeds and a substantial amount of USDC proceeds are also part of that. And it just represents there's a lot of different ways to deploy it and use it, both to grow the Radicle network and the main users, which are developers and core stakeholders, and also to just facilitate different working groups. Radicle up till now has mostly been built by a core team at Monatic. Not sure if you guys saw the blog post, but that company has now been dissolved, and sort of focus and the core working groups have been transitioned over to the foundation. Over time, for maximum decentralization and for maximum just sustainability, the sort of long-term vision for the treasury is for that to end up being the main pool of resources, capital, and really the main coordinating force behind development, stewardship, and maintenance of the Radicle network. So we're still really early. We're sort of right at the beginning of really creating on-chain ideas and proposals through the treasury, but I think we're creating something that hopefully can sort of provide lasting value and stewardship for Radicle over the next 10 years. So there will be lots of new ideas, lots of new things, but everything we're doing, I think, is really just paving a path over the next decade, really. So in terms of just jumping into like basic ideas on how the treasury can be deployed, this isn't an area that is super complex right now. We're just getting off the ground, so it really falls into two or three main categories, and we've can just empirically look at other crypto projects and see how they've been deployed, in terms of like major DeFi projects, other major base layer protocols. Proposals for governance for the treasury generally fall into either growth, incentives, so such as liquidity mining for volume if you're an AMM, lending platforms or other forms, and then specific spending programs for contributors, developers to make them a part of the community, incentivize them to learn and develop on top of your project. And this happens through grants programs, specific governance proposals. But this is sort of, you could look at it as almost as a form of corp dev, where you're trying to get as much talent and interested users as possible. And there's established models on how to best do these things. And I think specifically for the grants program, it's going to be important to, I think, have be thoughtful about what is the composition, who's on that committee, because there's lots of different things that can and should be funded, and I think it's going to take a lot of different perspectives to really cover everything. So if anyone on this call has interest or thoughts about grants and is interested in helping out or approving or looking at a sort of radical grants program, or if you have ideas that you want funded or feedback on, like this is the working group is the place to sort of talk about yourself and share a little bit about sort of what you're doing and what you're interested in. So that's still getting off the ground, and I think we're still working through what specifically the size and the scope of the grants program. But that's something that I think is an easy and simple and really necessary first step. And then, after that, the second main area are the growth initiatives. And I think this probably looks a little different for Radicle compared to some of the existing incentive programs. Like for DeFi projects, right? Like it's pretty, the main metric is either like trading volume or origination volume or LP, or the size and scope of LPs that are providing liquidity. For Radicle, it's like when you think about what the main goal is, the main goal is to really get a broad set of developers using Radicle to build orgs, to build projects, and really using it as the launch pad for really important projects. So I think in terms of incentivizing specific behaviors, the focus really is on allowing developers to learn about Radicle, incentivize them to build on top of it, and really help them learn the ins and outs of how to build organizations and working groups through Radicle orgs. And I think there's been some ideas posted in the forums about how to do this. LA, thanks for some of the excellent ideas, and I've talked about this with some of you on the call as well. But I think that's another area where there will be a lot of different models in how to design it. So that will be its own separate proposal, and definitely something that I think we'll be prioritizing and looking for feedback over the next month or two. That's the high level of some of the basic sort of core ideas we've seen in other projects and we think would be good for Radicle. Again, these are just getting the conversation going. If anyone has any thoughts or feedback, like now is the time, or if you want to post in the forums, that's another great avenue. But this will be an ongoing discussion that I think we'll have online in the chat groups as well as on this call every few weeks. So yeah, if anyone has any questions about anything I said specifically or about the framework that we've proposed, or just questions about how other projects are operating their treasury, feel free to request to speak or post a question in chat.
Cool. So if anybody has any thoughts that they want to share, maybe first reflection after reading the proposal for the Treasury framework, you can throw a hand up and request to speak now. If not, we can kind of just start diving into different things. I don't think anybody is raising their hands yet. So while we're waiting to see if anybody does, I think one thing that maybe I wanted to just push into discussion now is maybe the role, and maybe we can talk about this a little bit, the role of the Radicle Governance Working Group in defining the Treasury strategy and how that relates to different like work stream conversations. So Derek, you kind of just like touched on this, but this proposal for the Treasury framework wasn't just a, here are some ideas for what we should do. It's also a proposal for this is how we strategize around the Radicle Treasury. And so I think that this working group will also kind of be responsible for like crafting and maintaining that strategy of the Radicle Treasury, and is something that maybe is a work stream in itself on like how the community keeps really each other accountable for participation in that strategy. Because again, this is something that's coming emergent through the community, not top down through the core team or through the Radicle Foundation. And so I think it's important to say that this working group will kind of be the leaders that are kind of crafting that strategy and presenting it to the community, and we'll have the responsibility for doing that. And so I think that a big thing is, bringing in more people who are interested in kind of like coordinating that mission and supporting with like operationally, right? To do that and do that in a way that's accessible by the community. And then there's the work stream discussions, which we can also talk about who will lead, right? This is an open question I think I have, is that we'll have all of these ideas. We already have a ton of ideas coming out of this thread. And so I think a question that we can discuss is how do we boil these ideas down into different work stream discussions and productively, yet also collectively, go about moving each of them forward individually. That's actually something that we could discuss right now if you guys want, if you have ideas on.
Yeah, I think in terms of specific work streams, I think, yeah, like you can almost look at like some of the ideas that we talked about, even the Treasury as a whole, as one specific work stream. And yeah, like different working groups, different people, if they have ideas or experience on doing specific ones, just really taking the initiative, proposing work streams, and then just getting funded through the Treasury, through an on-chain proposal. So I think, yeah, as you said, Abby, there's a lot of different sort of ideas and possibilities, and yeah, like the Treasury is you could look at it as just one example of what a work stream could be.
Yeah, like something I think about a lot when it comes to work streams, and you sort of see this across pretty much all DAOs, is it's sort of a struggle right now, right? Where you have, let's say, a community of, I don't know, 100 or 1,000 contributors. Everyone sort of has a individual bespoke idea for what the main work streams for a project should be. And then if you were to stack rank it for each individual, you sort of get often very different views on what is actually the most important, or what are the most important work streams that projects and a DAO could be working on, right? And obviously there's different levels of importance depending on the DAO. And as a community coming together to sort of stack rank and reconcile the different priorities of what should be worked on, I think is super critical, and would love to, with this awesome community, just start discussing like what are the highest ROI things we could be doing in the short, medium, and long term, and how do we stack rank the importance, and if the importance changes, after we start working on something, let's say, we start a work stream, and 2 months in, it's clear that this was maybe not the highest priority thing to do. How do we have a process for reallocating resources to the high priority things to do? This is a struggle for companies. It's a struggle for any sort of coordinated human effort, but for DAOs in particular, it's really challenging and really important to start thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I actually added to the thread, which when we're talking about growth initiatives, which is another category of ideas for what could be funded by the Radicle Treasury, is when we're evaluating growth initiatives, which are less of like one-off allocations, potentially continuous changes to protocols or continuous fund allocations that are based in the potential for success, so the impact that it could have on the network. Who is evaluating the success, right? How are we reflecting on it, and when? Because again, these growth initiatives, maybe they do live under the Radicle Foundation, but I think that the goal is that we want it to be more of like a community responsibility to be contributing to the development of these growth initiatives and the accountability of managing those. And so I think that's like an open question maybe for us to log, right? Which is like, what is the process for evaluating the success of growth initiatives within the Radicle ecosystem? So we would be able to understand how we'd be able to evaluate something like a seed node incentivization program, right? Or like a liquidity mining program, things at those ends. And so I'd be really interested in how other projects do that. And I'm wondering if it sits under the Radicle working group, this working group, or if it's something that's like a subcommittee for each growth initiative that's based off of whoever's the domain expert there, and they report in the monthly community call. So there's kind of like a lot of open questions I have there about like process as well. I don't know if anybody in the audience has any thoughts on that or is coming from a community in which they're doing it. We also have a question in the chat from Nick, which is how might we manage potential conflicts of interest for governance working group members who want to make proposals for grants from the Treasury, which is a really good question that we can maybe tap into right now. I think that this, Nick, I'll double click on this and voice a question that I also shared in the thread, which is how do we also use the grants program as core team members, right? I think that Radicle, now that it's been decentralized from Monatic, which was this company, to multiple groups of maintainers who are funded via the Radicle Foundation and all have their own strategies and objectives that are supporting the growth and success of the project. These core teams also have ideas for what will positively benefit the project, and also often have the expertise from being involved in the project for a long time to support with prioritization. And so I think an open question that I have that I think pairs well with yours, Nick, which is how do we manage potential conflicts? And then also how do we create access into this grants program for core team members who want to coordinate project development via grants? And is there a separation, or are they of the same thing? Like, do we separate it or do we keep it involved? I think that's interesting. Nick, do you want to speak on this? Do you have, do you want to jump on, or do you just want to stay over text? Okay, he hasn't requested to speak, so I guess we'll just stay over text. Nothing further to add. Cool.
And
what do you guys think about that?
Jump into that, yeah, Abby. Nick, I think it's a really sort of important thing that everyone is thinking about now, which is, there's no formal disclosure requirements right now, right, for most projects, and that sort of it sort of requires some self-policing. And in my experience here, I think the most important thing is just transparency, right? There will be conflicts of interest. particularly if you're a contributor for multiple DAOs or you're sitting on multiple grants programs, there will be conflicts. And I think the most important thing and the duty everyone has, if they are in that privileged seat, is disclosure, right, and transparency. And I think as long as people are transparent about what sort of responsibilities they have, who is paying them, I think that goes a long way. It's not perfect, right? But it gets us really, I think, far to avoiding or at least disclosing the conflicts of interest.
Yeah, I definitely think that the process around evaluating grants, who's managing that process and managing conflicts, all kind of falls within one very clear work stream, right? Which is like scoping out the process and the how of the grants program, which I feel like we already knew is going to be its own work stream, but it's also nice to just like explicitly call it out that this is a follow-up that we can do, like another discussion thread that kind of dives into these details, capturing different points that we have scattered throughout conversations that we've had regarding this.
I'll just bring from the chat unless you want to request to speak. That another point was that, oh, there we go, cool.
Hey, hey from me. First of all, thank you for starting the conversation. It's really nice to see that this is happening, especially in such a community-driven fashion. I only had a point on Nick's question, which I think is totally valid, and like just from experience from other communities, usually what happens is that individuals, basically like the community defaults to individuals that are more public facing and have reputation at stake, as some folks say in crypto, to basically not collude in public. But of course it's always really hard, and there are always individual interests. I think the other thing that I've noticed from certain communities that I participate in is that, especially for when it comes to both grants and growth initiatives, many young communities basically default into really frequent checks. So for instance, let's say you're about to give a grant of 100K, what you might do is like basically just split it in monthly or quarterly batches, and then also create some feedback loop there. So try to build your confidence as you go that okay, these conflicting interests are not hurting the project. But yeah, these are two observations.
Cool. So awesome. Thanks for that. I was on mute, I realized, and when I started talking. I definitely think that kind of evaluating, I think that this is all really good input into kind of how we should frame the conversation around who's involved with these discussions and who has responsibility and who has accountability and how that relates to the general community. I think that I want to say, Jenny, I'll pass it off to you now. Jenny was also on mute, who's going to hop in here. I'll pass it off to Jenny, who will kind of shift the conversation a little bit to maybe focus a little bit more on specific questions that people have about the Radicle Treasury, specific ideas that people want to share about how they think that the Radicle Treasury should be deployed. We have this great thread that I'll share in the channel right now that we posted a couple months ago that was starting to kind of start brainstorming around ideas. So maybe we can start talking about that, and then we have a couple people who might want to chime in on specific topics. But yeah, Jenny, I'll pass it off to you.
Cool, thanks, Abby. So now we'll start this section on community initiatives. So some of you in the audience have actually told us that you might have some things to say. So I'll be calling on you soon. But first, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Jenny. I used to work at MetaMask on the smart contract wallets, some of that stuff, and a bunch of other things there. I've been interested in crypto for quite a while. I've known about Radicle for like about 2 years and very happy to work with them. Started working with them. I think I work with DAppHub and we did an audit for Radicle a while back before the token launch. I've just kept in touch since then. So one of my goals for this working group call is to get people familiar with us and with each other and to feel comfortable sharing their ideas here or async. So please feel free to share in the chat. It looks like, we'll be pretty active, but you guys should get active too. And if you have any questions about what anything that's been discussed till now, please raise your hand or make a little post. I think I'll start then with bringing Ali back up, if that's all right, because there's a community initiative on growth, and then we'll keep monitoring the chat for open Q&As. And if no one has any, I have a couple open discussions that we can come back to a bit. So, Ali, if you're still here.
I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Perfect.
What am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to just say a few words on my comments? Basically.
So I have you on this community initiative about growth as a requested community discussion.
I think that maybe this is because of your thoughts that you put in the chat, LA. I thought maybe you would want to share regarding, you said concerning growth initiatives. I have a number of ideas that I thought would just be probably good to share in this chat and talk through a little bit.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. I can say a few ones, and I was brainstorming on the post, but generally, as I'm thinking about the strategy of Radicle, where the network is right now, basically, most folks are using the Radicle infrastructure to mirror repos that are also on GitHub or GitLab, right? And then basically, as of last month, we basically, the network started having Radicle orgs, which are super exciting, specifically for DAOs. This is, decentralized code governance. One of the things that obviously is really ugly on everything that has to do with Ethereum mainnet right now is that both for org creation and for anchoring, it's just super expensive. And there's already a team that's working on bringing in Radicle to layer 2. Igor is in the audience, is working on that, but we still have a way to go there. So I was thinking that one growth initiative would be to basically subsidize the treasury, to subsidize the cost for creating orgs and for starting to anchor your first releases potentially, and then ideally there would be a process for that to happen. You pay upfront and then the treasury pays you back. So eventually you have no cost in doing that. So that was one idea, specifically I think that it's important for the network to start pushing more usage around Radicle orgs, because I think it's a unique feature that you don't have in any other code collaboration network. And then my team, and this is where conflict of interest, of course, my team is working on Radicle funding, a bunch of us that also are in the audience, and we've been working on an idea that we call community tokens that we're writing a post that will go live. But one growth idea there is that when that thing launches, potentially we can do some kind of matching program. So if people support open source projects within the Radicle network, potentially the Radicle treasury could have a process to say, well, we're going to double that. Or, we're going to actually give you more governing power by giving you more RAD, or things like that. These are the two things that I feel that are directly connected to our strategy. And then the last thing that I had there is that, there've been conversations left and right about a seed note incentivization program, but obviously, to do this in a trust minimization way, this is extremely hard. You have teams with literally hundreds of millions failing to do that. So there, I feel that we might have to default into something that is hacky or not so centralized. Potentially we might need to have a bunch of delegates from the community that oversee that process somehow. But I think that's something that has been discussed a lot. There hasn't been a lot of progress, but it's definitely an interesting one. These were 3 ideas, and I'm going to go back to the audience. That's okay.
Awesome. Ben, I'm going to invite you to speak now because we also have Ben who from Rabbit Hole will share some ideas. Pass it off to you. I just want to double click on the seed node incentivization. Exley, if you had anything specifically that you wanted to chat on, I know that you've been developing some thoughts around this. You can hop on stage. But if not, maybe I'll just also reflect on some of those things. I think that from the community side, I think that this is for everybody in the audience, org development and getting DAOs to deploy Radicle orgs is like a very key adoption KPI, I think, within our team right now. And I think that, LA, what you said about subsidizing the cost or creating more incentives for running orgs and deploying orgs is a really good like short-term goal and priority that I think I would agree with. I also wanted to just note that I think that Radicle orgs can also be a tool that we can use in our governance. And so I want an overall theme throughout these conversations to be like, how can we also be using Radicle to make our governance more transparent, verifiable, or trustless? And so I shared a specific idea in thread regarding how we can run our grants program with a Radicle org, which we can maybe dive into more detail in the work stream when we have that. But I think that that's also something that I'd love to hear people's thoughts on, which is like, how can we, and maybe this is from people who have had experience in governing in communities before, is like, how can we solve problems, with the decentralized infrastructure that Radicle has built? And how can we begin experimenting with that with some of these early proposals? So yeah, also pass it. So I'll pass it off to you, Ben. Also bring John on to speak. John, you can join after Ben.
Thanks, Abby. I think you and Ellie teed it up very well for what I'd like to speak about. So thank you for that. Excited about the project and also excited that the community is growing and starting to get more involved. My name's Ben. I'm the operations lead at Rabbit Hole. So full transparency, like approaching today from the Rabbit Hole perspective. But for those that don't know, Rabbit Hole helps crypto projects, communities, and networks find users and contributors, and we incentivize them with the project's tokens and reward them for taking specific on-chain actions. So as Radicle looks to get more users onboarded and setting up orgs, our thought is that Rabbit Hole could be a partner that helps incentivize users to do so, uses Sybil to make sure that individual users are actually doing so, and then rewards those users for taking the action, measuring the action on chain through the graph, and rewarding those users. So as you all think about how to incentivize new people to set up orgs, we would love to be a thought partner there and hopefully collaborate on that. We've worked with a lot of the leading projects in DeFi and also the Web3 space. Recently did a project with Graph, for example, where they launched the curating function and they wanted to find new people to curate in their network. And so we had a quest where we incentivized people to go and signal or curate on different subgraphs. And we were able to increase their individual number of curators by 4 times in just like a 3 or 4 day span. So, as you all think about how to get new users who are setting up orgs and using the Radicle platform, we would love to be a partner and to help you incentivize those users to do that and to track that those users are actually completing what they say they're going to do and then rewarding them for doing so. We have a strong user base of people who are genuinely interested in using crypto products. They're not speculators. They want to get more involved in crypto and Web3 largely. And we think we could help spread the word, awareness, and education about what Radicle is doing, and hopefully find new users who are using the Radicle orgs and the different features that you'd like to incentivize. So happy to answer any questions you all have about Rabbit Hole. But regardless, just very excited about everything you all are doing here and the growth of the community initiatives.
Nice. Thanks for chiming in. I think that's it's a really cool idea, because I do think that not just with Radicle orgs, but there's like a ton of ways that we want people to use Radicle, and I think that one, incentivizing obviously is really great, but also just like putting it in front of someone. Like, I like how your website says, this is how you can become an NFT creator, right? Or this is learn how to become a treasury manager. I think it's like learn how to decentralize your code base, or learn how to run a Radicle org with your DAO. And I think framing it as skills and then framing those skills in quests could be a really good way to frame some of the new behavior that, specifically like the Radicle Ethereum features are presenting, because it is very like crypto native coordination that isn't really the status quo for collaboration outside of the Web3 space. So I think that that's really cool. I had a question about how do you track it? So you said that you use Sybil. So can you walk me through how you did the graph example quickly? I think we have time, and then we can pass it off to you, John. But I'd love to just hear a little bit more details about that.
Yeah, so there's two parts of it. We track completion using subgraphs from the graph. I saw you guys recently deployed your subgraph, so we would query the subgraph to see the activity of each user and to ensure that their rabbit hole address that's tied to their rabbit hole account has actually completed the task on Radicle. And then the second piece of that is, you could spin up 100 different addresses and claim all the incentive rewards. So to prevent against that, to claim rewards, it's up to the project, but many times the project wants to make sure it's a unique individual. So we use Bright ID to ensure proof of uniqueness, proof of human, so that the people claiming the rewards are actually unique individuals.
Okay, great. Yeah, for us, I feel like with orgs, it's probably it's very easy to verify that someone has created an org because using our subgraph and everything, so it'd be pretty easy to find uniqueness and measure that. But I guess it's also just about like continued behavior, right? Like, I think that that's also something, like it's about getting the org, but then it's actually like using it in your workflow. And so I'd also be interested in understanding, and maybe this is for another discussion, which is kind of about like what growth initiatives can we use to stimulate developer adoption or increase developer adoption. And this could potentially be like a quest on Rabbit Hole, could be a proposal that falls underneath that work stream for sure. So I'm excited to dive into that, and I'd love to like note it as another discussion that we should maybe flesh out a little bit on the forums.
Yeah, would love to work through that with you all in the community and figure out how to design this in the way that incentivizes the behaviors that you all are looking for. Nice.
Cool, that's awesome. So yeah, if anybody has any more questions for Ben, just drop them in the chat, and we can note this as a thing to kind of discuss further in the forum. I definitely already have some ideas that I'd love to flesh out a little bit. John, I'll pass it off to you. Do you have any thoughts or open questions that you'd like to contribute?
Yeah, thank you, Abby. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. So I'm John from Galaxy. Obviously, we're very excited about Radicle and want to continue to be an active part of how the network governed. And so, one of the things we've talked with the Radicle team a lot about throughout the past year is just this idea of let's make our mission, at least our proximate mission, to get every DAO in the world on Radicle. And so, as we think about that, right, there are a lot of ideas about how do we get different orgs to get created. And so I think something, probably needs to be fleshed out, but something we can work on with, Larry and Derek and the rest of the community. but something that looks like an emission for those who are transferring over a code base, say from GitHub, but not just the act of porting it over once, but actually either replicating it or ideally eventually just maintaining it solely on Radicle. I think would be something that's appealing, that we've received some good initial but perhaps anecdotal feedback on. And beyond that, I'd probably in the next couple months will submit a few proposals to see if we could get some funding for what you could think of as like dev relations or dev evangelism. Uh, as as Ben said, as you said too, just getting this in front of more people, especially these DAOs that we want to convert, is going to be a material step in the road to getting every DAO in the world on Radicle. And it's true that a lot of folks in our orbit and in the orbit of the Radicle team members and others know about Radicle, but certainly starting with awareness will be key. So from my perspective, kind of the way that we can incentivize the growth will look like threefold, right? So first, creating actual token incentives for those who are porting over a code base, or even just like single repositories from GitHub over to Radicle. Increased incentives for those who are actually maintaining them. And third, providing grants for folks to occupy what you could think of as developer relations or developer evangelism roles. And obviously, if anyone has any questions about what these would look like, I'd be happy to discuss it. I'm still thinking through these ideas myself, but these are things that I'd like to see happening in the next few months.
Nice. Yeah, I definitely would love to see some more ideas around token incentives for using Radicle, and then also like how that plays into an increased incentives for maintaining them, because it is hard to kind of track maintenance, right? It's the same thing with like the seed node incentivization is like a whole nother story, right? But it's like how do we define those metrics in this kind of like trustless, permissionless system, and how do we do it in a way that's supporting like healthy, engaged behavior and not just kind of like gamified behavior, right? And so I feel like that's why I do really like this subsidy idea, LA, which is it's just like making it easier also, and like reducing the barrier, which is a passive incentive, I feel like in some ways. But direct incentives potentially through like matching, like funding open source, like using some of the Radicle funding features. I feel like riffing on some of those ideas will be really interesting. So I would be really interested to hear more details either now, John, or kind of just like in the forum or in this chat around kind of what you think would work there based off of your experience with other projects as well.
One of the things we actually, this is an idea that we've discussed a few times, but obviously devil will be in the details of implementation. But creating a sort of, you could imagine this being the equivalent of a bridge between tracking a depositor's GitHub, or sorry, like a converter's GitHub repo, and then seeing that any update that is being pushed or any pull request that's getting submitted, then the same one is occurring, coming through uplink or basically eventually hitting the repo that they claim to own on Radicle. That would be one way to track it. We're talking with a few people with some more background in zero knowledge proofs to see about, can you create a system that proves that first, yes, I am the owner of this repository on GitHub, and I am proving that I am the one who is pushing these updates on a Radicle node. But I'd be lying if I said that it's not. It's all fairly early conversations at the moment.
Yeah, nice. Something that also came to my head while you were speaking was about like the dev relations stuff, right? Like, which is how do you also contribute to increasing awareness and visibility for the Radicle project. And I think this goes back to what I mentioned earlier, which is like how Treasury initiatives relate to project objectives. Because again, as we talked about, the Radicle Foundation now coordinates strategy among a group of core teams who all have their own objectives. The community team's objective, I mean, everybody's objective is to build a great product to increase adoption and get more developers, but the communities team is also to like increase awareness and like get more people using Radicle and talking about it. And so I think that question and that point, that goal, the last one, John, that you said about investing in developer relations and getting more people aware of Radicle, kind of also plays into that original question that I had, which is how do core teams, how can they use or not influence the Radicle Treasury, but also like help prioritize the Radicle Treasury by saying, this is what we need to do, and I think that this all plays into the larger conversation, which is outlined in that post, which is the end goal for Radicles is for all project development to be funded via the DAO, which is kind of what we're starting to build right now. And so I think that this is a really interesting place to start experimenting with early, which is how can we use these mechanisms that we're going to be developing, a grants program or processes, social processes around token holder votes and allocating funds to start satisfying like project objectives that are coming from core teams and giving core teams the ability to kind of push certain information, I guess, or just proposals to the community that the community then can move through governance. And I think that will be a really interesting workflow to kind of experiment with and be really open about and test out.
Yeah, I'd say. Sorry, go ahead, Ella. Whatever you have to say is much more interesting than what I have to say.
No, please go ahead.
I was going to, I'll suppose double down on what you said, Abby. I think this will kind of be a critical thing for all of us to accomplish together is how can we get, everyone here is obviously very excited about Radicle, but how can we make it such that this group in a year looks larger and that the org count looks larger and that the amount of updates and the amount of development that's happening through Radicle is larger. And I think these developer relations or evangelism, as you might want to call it, should be an object of focus.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's definitely a good idea, and thanks John for bringing it up. Definitely, I think we have to do, as a community, we have to do a lot more work on awareness. I've seen there are all sorts of crazy wacky experiments that are happening in crypto around that. Some of those go a bit too far sometimes. But yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely an interesting one, like how we could get the word out around Radicle. I think that's definitely something that we could potentially we could have a working group. I think talking about these things is the one thing that comes to mind. I think I mentioned it in one of my posts, is that the tricky thing with this type of work is basically how I think Abby, you touched a bit on that, which okay, what success looks like, but it's not just success in terms of a numerical thing, but also a lot of the exciting things about Radicle, many of those come from the principles that we applied early on, that the project is not willing to compromise this and that and this other thing, right? And I'm wondering, before we start decentralizing these different functions of governance, how could we start thinking about giving, let's say, you're about to do a grant for Radicle, how can we be giving you a few things that will help you design a solution that will fit here? And we could say that maybe too much for now, but I feel that probably that's something that's going to be quite important later down the road, and will help people basically design solutions. Either that's for awareness, or that's for technical solutions, or whatever. Yeah, and anyone from the audience, like, have you seen any communities do that? The more principle development or the more principle work do that quite well. And it's a fear of mine.
Maybe not. And you leave the stage. Yeah, LA, I think that that's a really good point, which is how we, and this is probably goes into any expectation that we have with any decision that's being made by the community, right? Which is like, and this, I feel like we talked about this in like our earliest conversations, which is like, what are the social responsibilities that you have about being a participant in the Radicle community, and how do we kind of create that social contract between us that says these are the principles that we're building towards, that allow us to kind of keep a not a moral compass, but a compass when evaluating decisions as a community as they relate to token incentives and sustainability and growth. So I think that that will also be something ongoing, and probably is a work stream in itself. I just want to note that Jenny called out like what a work stream is, and how I've been using that. I think I've been saying it a lot. And I think that a work stream is going to be any additional discussion that will create a thread for. I think that that's how it will look like physically. I think Larry and Derek will probably take lead on kind of structuring these and presenting these to the community, but with the goal of then creating a separate space for diving into a specific concept, a specific question, or a specific idea, so we can make sure that we're keeping conversations focused, because there's so much that we can touch on. And so I feel like a good takeaway from this chat will probably be the working group publicly as well, like in this channel, be discussing what should be those first work streams that we start diving into. And already I feel like the first one is this grants program. I think people agree that we want to get people building on and using Radicle, and also figuring out how that plays into the project's objectives and principles is kind of like an additional thing with that. Another one being, how do we increase developer adoption? And can we use token incentives to do that? I think was like another great point. Can we use rabbit hole quests? And so I feel like we'll try to digest that with everybody who wants to be involved, and present that back, so we can next session kind of dive into those specific ideas. Just as a wrap-up thought. We're already 5 minutes over. Larry and Derek, is there anything else that you guys want to kind of like touch on, double click on, or ask the audience before we wrap up?
Nothing from me. I think, yeah, Abby, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. I think, yeah, my only sort of ask for anyone on the call is to take a look at the forums and think about some of the things that we've been talking about today in terms of like new work streams, ideas on how to deploy the treasury. If you were to design like a growth program from scratch to sort of help Radicle over the next few years, like how would you do it? And yeah, like would love to brainstorm with you guys and discuss with you guys. So yeah. And I think in terms of this call, I think, Abby, we talked about doing this on monthly cadence. But yeah, so curious on your guys' feedback on this call and cadence as well for the future.
Yeah, I think keeping it as monthly. If anybody has any feedback on that, please drop it in the chat. Like, I think we really just want this chat to be like a casual hangout for anybody who has any thoughts about Radicle governance. And I think that we specifically will be coordinating most of our async discussions via this channel as well. I think we'll also try to make any internal sync that we have as we start digesting this information as the people who are kind of, now coordinating this working group. We'll be having these publicly on either just like an informal voice chat that we create that we'll announce to the working group, or we'll be publicly sharing notes from any sync that we have. But I think that the goal for us as we kind of go about coordinating this working group is to do it public by default, so people have the opportunity to engage and get involved. So I definitely would, stay. Keep eyes out for any notifications in this channel and opportunities to get involved. I think that most official discussion will be put through radical.community. This Discord channel updates, that's under the governance category, also gets any forum post in the governance category pushed to it. So the Discord is also like a good place to keep up to date with those conversations that are happening. But I think that we'll keep most of the conversation to the chat and keep some discussions happening there. But it seems like there's already some really great ones happening. So since we're at the hour and I want to be respectful of everybody's time, maybe we end this stage. The recording will go up on YouTube for anybody who missed it and wants to check in on it or revisit some of the conversations. But yeah, so I think now the next steps are for the working group to kind of digest and figure out where to go next in regards to the Radical Treasury proposal, and then keep coordinating our discussions in public via this working group chat. So that's all for me. If anybody else who's speaking has any other notes that they want to share, feel free. No? Cool. Okay, so we'll, I guess we'll end it here. Thank you everybody for listening.
Thanks, everyone.
Cool. I'm gonna figure out how to end this. I guess I just exit.